Welcome to another episode of WireWheel's Privacy Rollup, a weekly recap of newsworthy privacy updates from our CPO, Rick Buck. Rick, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well today. Jean, how are you?
Doing well, doing well. It looks like there's quite a bit going on in the privacy legislation world over the past week. So one of the topics I'd like to cover is I hear that the European Data Protection Board has filed a favorable opinion on the Cloud Code of Conduct. Sounds like there's been a lot of development over the past 10 years on that. So tell us a little bit more about the latest.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation. The Europeans have a long history of leading the charge with privacy legislation, and B, introducing privacy legislation that has a long fuse. Much like the e-privacy directive, the EU's Cloud Code of Conduct has been kind of sitting dormant for a while. It was introduced about 10 years ago. And when it was initially introduced, it was introduced in the vernacular of the day, right? Mm-hmm. Technology wasn't where we are 10 plus years later. GDPR had not yet been born. We were still under the General Data Protection Act, known as the Act. Technology was different, processing was different. The ubiquity of cloud computing was not nearly where we are today. Almost a decade later, mid-May, the European Data Protection Board filed a favorable opinion on moving forward with the Cloud Code of Conduct. It's being overseen by the Belgian Data Protection Authority. They're going to be the lead body behind this. Let me talk a little bit about what it's a tongue twister, what the Cloud Code of Conduct actually is. It was born in an effort to, as GDPR, as e-privacy, as many of the other privacy-forward ways that the Europeans think, it was born to foster an environment of trust and transparency in the EU cloud computing market. It was born with the idea of simplifying the risk assessment process for cloud providers so that customers of those services could make more informed decisions about cloud providers that they want to work with. Right. It was developed by Scope Europe, which is an independent third party, and they did that in association with a bunch of other industry leaders. If it comes to fruition, it's going to apply to business cloud service providers who act as processors. Mm-hmm. This aligns very closely, getting a little privacy geeky here, with Article 28 of the GDPR. Right. But it's one of the things that people like about the Code of Conduct is that it is aligned with GDPR. And to that extent, Matthew Michael, I was saying his name backwards, who's the Belgian Secretary of State for Digitization, has praised the code and calls out exactly that it is consistent with GDPR, that it's consistent with new cybersecurity frameworks and certifications and data protection standards, and that it really is attempting to foster a collaboration between regulators and industry. So, getting good backing from the regulator who's going to be enforcing this if it comes into effect. Mm-hmm. They've done some interesting things where the code is trying to make it friendly for all kinds of businesses, all sizes of businesses in the cloud computing world, right? And to that extent, they're presenting three different compliance levels by which you can qualify. The first level involves allows companies to conduct an internal review of their own conformity, and then send that assessment to Scope Europe for further review. And that's really, I think, to foster and to allow smaller companies with less resources the ability to get started. The second level of compliance allows for cloud service providers to submit additional evidence of their partial compliance and do that through an independent third party. And then the most robust level would be to actually have full compliance with the Code of Conduct and have that done with the support of third-party certificates and audits. Okay. So they're making it somewhat easy for businesses to comply with the code. So some obvious questions about the code.
Mhm.
Are cloud service providers actually required to comply with the code of conduct? And the short answer is no, they aren't. Participation is voluntary.
Wow.
But the hope and the expectation is that there will become industry-wide adoption with this. It will be a badge of honor for you to say that you're applying the code and abiding by the code, and likely will be the way your company will be judged as a cloud computing company.
Well, it sounds like it's giving them an opportunity to be proactive as opposed to reactive, right?
Yeah, and in many respects, one of my mantras is, it will allow companies to use privacy and security as a competitive advantage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another question that I think people would ask is, can a company, excuse me, how do you actually prove that you're, how do you demonstrate that you are adhering to the code of conduct? And so in order to do that, you need to be a current member of the General Assembly of the EU Code of Conduct. And that membership is going to be available to any cloud provider, and they can apply for it online. So that'll make it easy. People will have to pay a fee. People will have to, sign a declaration of adherence. And there'll be a website dedicated to that will list all companies that are participating. Adherence will be determined by Scope Europe. They'll be the sort of one of the overseers of this. They'll be the accredited monitoring body that'll verify and check on compliance. So it'll have some checks and balances in it, and it'll be interesting to see where this goes. And so from what this means point of view, Europe continues to lead the way on privacy initiatives, and as goes Europe, so does the rest of the world. Privacy continues to be an increasingly important part of doing business globally. And as we have seen in the last year or so, and we've spoken about in these broadcasts, privacy laws and best practices are being updated and harmonized across the globe to keep up with technology, to keep up with new standards, to keep up with the way in which we are using and collecting data. I'm glad to see that these things are starting to come together, and that people are considering two things. One, how do we make the collection and use and storage of data easy, safe, trustworthy, and how do we do that in a way that isn't a friction point for businesses to comply?
Right.
And I think this is another example of where we're seeing that manifest.
Well, just like you said, I mean, technology, as we know, moves at the speed of light. So trying to keep up with that in itself is quite a feat.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, keeping the regulations up and the data privacy up as well is just incredible. So there was another when we talk about everything that's happening in the US specifically, I wanted to talk about what's happening in terms of legislation activity in Colorado. It sounds like they have just enacted a SB 190. And so it's passed through their Senate on May 26th. Can you give us a little bit more information about that?
Yeah, this is a little bit like Groundhog Day. This is another state that has moved forward with a bill or introduced a bill that looks a lot like CCPA, looks a lot like Virginia, looks a lot like GDPR. It has passed the Senate, and now it needs to move through the House. It has all of the moving parts you would expect to see. There are disclosures that are required on the categories of personal data, the purpose for which data is used, the category of personal data that's being shared, categories of third parties that you're sharing it with, reasonable security, data minimization, data protection assessments are going to be required. All the sort of many of the moving parts we've seen, again, in California, in Virginia, in GDPR.
Right.
I'm not sure if this is a thing that will help it or hurt it, but there is no private right of action as it's written right now. we'll see where this one goes. It is yet another significant state that is introducing a very consistent with other state privacy laws privacy bill. The good news is, should it pass, and you are already moving forward with your Virginia and California compliance, you are moving in the right direction to be Colorado compliant as well.
Right.
So, we thought there was a little bit of a slowdown in state legislation. There's been a little bit of energy and a little bit of excitement there in the last week or so. There's a couple other states where things are brewing, but Colorado seems the one that's popped its head up the highest in the last couple of days. So,
and that they have.
We'll keep a close eye on this one.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, there are a ton of other states I could ask you about because I see a lot of activity going on, but more to come, right?
Exactly.
Oh, okay. Well, I want to thank you for this week's update, Rick. And I also want to thank our viewers for tuning into WireWheel's weekly privacy roll-up. And if you have any questions out there, viewers, please feel free to reach out to us at marketing@wirewheel.io. And you'll also be able to find us in the link described below. Also, be sure to subscribe to WireWheel's YouTube channel as well. And again, thank you for your time today, Rick, and you have a good one.
Always a pleasure. Thanks everybody for listening. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.